Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Growing Up with Godzilla. My name is Donnie Winter, and this is my show where I have conversations with fellow Godzilla fans about not only the character, but how they've grown with the character, how they've grown with the franchise. And ultimately, I've had a wonderful time this season just learning new things about phenomenal human beings and how they have really just kind of soaked up the Godzilla franchise. And I've learned a lot of lessons, and I've learned a lot of different realizations that people have made as a result of being devout fans. So, and of course, a lot of these conversations have centered around creativity, which our conversation tonight is going to probably circulate around as well. And this is the season 1 finale of Growing Up with Godzilla, so I had to invite this guest on for the season finale to join me. So I am a huge, huge fan of, well, not only art, but I'm a huge fan of different outlets for kaiju fans, and outlets in general. And this individual happens to be one of the brilliant minds behind Kaiju Ramen magazine. Lo and behold, welcome to Travis Alexander. Hello.
Hey, you're really talking me up a lot. I hope I can live up to the expectation.
Oh, you will, you will. I like to make it like a good intro. Let's just say.
Right.
So,
Like one of the brilliant minds. Like, okay.
I mean, I would argue brilliant minds. So, well, okay. So to begin, I do want to kind of show off one of the Kaiju Ramen magazine issues, which,
Yeah.
uh, and this also happens to be the one that a couple of my poems were
I
published
got,
in.
I got a
And
few of them.
iconic. I have the rest of them, but they're in my kitchen
Uh-huh.
right now. But so I'm really obsessed with Kaiju Ramen magazine because I feel
No.
like it's, like I was saying in the introduction, provides an outlet, but I think it is very inclusive of different art forms, different perspectives, and it's very pop culture and trendy looking too, which I absolutely love. So, Travis, first and foremost, I want to talk a little bit about your history as a Godzilla fan, and then we will end
Okay.
up talking about Kaiju Ramen because you know me,
Okay.
I will. But I do want to know about your history as a Godzilla fan. When did it start?
Well, for anybody who's maybe watched me on Kaiju Kim stream, they've probably heard this story a couple of times now because I've told it a couple of times. So when I've been on her live streams, but I always say that I kind of inherited my Godzilla fandom because my dad was a fan of Godzilla when I was growing up. So I mean, I can't even really remember what my first Godzilla film was because it was so early in my life that I can't even remember. It was just like Godzilla's always been there. I assume it's either Godzilla versus the Sea Monster or Son of Godzilla because those were the two VHSs that we had that were the oldest. But I mean, from as early as I can remember, Godzilla's always been there because of my dad.
That is amazing. I love that you focused in on Godzilla versus the Sea Monster and Son of Godzilla because, and I mentioned this in a couple of episodes earlier in the season too, because I think at least one other person mentioned that one as their first film,
Hmm.
which personally is, I think, one of the most underrated Showa era Godzilla films possible.
Yeah.
And I think it deserves so much more love. Like when you were a child. I want to go back to, little Travis who experienced this film for the first time. How did you absorb it? What were your immediate impressions?
Well, like I said, I don't really remember the first time I watched any of those films because we already owned them and when I was growing up, and I'm sure my dad probably showed them to me in the crib, or when I was too young to even remember that he was probably showing me Godzilla. But I remember just loving the monster fights. That was the thing that always stood out to me. Of course, I loved Godzilla, was my favorite. I had the Godzilla toy. and wish I still had it. Lost it between childhood and now. Wish I still had one of them, but yeah. I remember my dad giving that to me when I was a kid, and so yeah, it was always about watching these monsters fight, and just Godzilla was a superhero to me because he was the one that fought the bad monsters.
Right, same here. I feel very much the same way, especially I remember when I was a kid, I was very obsessed with Godzilla's Revenge for a long time.
Mm.
And then I went through that phase when I was older, I was just like, I'm too highbrow to like this film. Ugh. And now I'm just like, Donnie, stop, stop. Like, it was a great film. It did what it needed to do. And
Yeah.
that's, I think, what I loved about a lot of the Showa era films. Like, it just they embody like this heroic spirit
Hmm.
that I found like very inspiring, you know?
Yeah.
And to this day, like I think back on those instances of heroism and I'm just like, wow, like that instilled a lot in me, even though I was not always willing to acknowledge it or think about it
Hmm.
or even be able to like process it slash analyze it until I was older.
Right.
So
Yeah, there's a lot of the themes that you see in a lot of those Godzilla films, even the ones that are for kids. There's still so many themes and elements in there that you don't pick up on until you watch them as an adult. But yeah, growing up, I grew up in the '90s, so the Heisei movies were making it. At least the ones that we did get in the U.S. They were making it over here when I was growing up, so I got to see uh Godzilla versus Biollante and Godzilla versus King Ghidorah and all those as a kid in the '90s, because I was like, and I was just so enthralled by them. Like, I just loved them. I loved Godzilla fighting all the bad monsters and fighting off the evil monsters.
me too. I just the Heisei era was such a shock for me when I was a kid because I went from like, you know, Godzilla versus Megalon to suddenly like Godzilla versus Biollante. And I've mentioned this before, but like it was just like so like terrifying and real looking to
Uh-huh.
me. And I look back at it now and I'm just like, wow, like they really shifted so much in just that 15 years, right?
Yep.
So I'm curious, like as you grew older, like when did you start kind of like realizing that heroic significance for Godzilla? Because you said that when you were very, very young, it just was something that was played in the background. When did you start really honing in on it?
Well, I think I always felt that heroic side of Godzilla, because to me, like I said, Godzilla was the hero. He was the one who fought the bad monsters. And then, in when Godzilla 2000 came out, I was fortunate enough to be able to go see it in theaters, because it
Oh,
actually had a theater close by that I was able to go and see it. And so seeing Godzilla on the big screen fighting the evil, invading aliens and stuff just was so crazy. And it wasn't even until, I want to say it wasn't until I got to be in my mid-teens that I started realizing, oh, some of these older films and some of these other films, Godzilla's not actually the hero. He's the bad guy. You see Godzilla GMK, Godzilla's the bad guy. And of course he's in a lot of those, he's played more as a victim and stuff. But yeah, I mean, Godzilla, the '90s Godzilla versus Mothra one was,
oh,
Godzilla was played as the villain, and so
oh,
it's
I
like
love that film.
I didn't pick up on kind of these elements of Godzilla was the bad guy in some of these movies until I was until I was a mid-teen. Then I'm like, wow, Godzilla is not always the hero. Sometimes he can be a bad guy.
You know, it's funny that you mentioned Godzilla versus Mothra, 92, because I watched it for the first time in a long while, like not long
Uh,
ago. And I just remember being so confused about that film when I was a kid because I like really was attached to Mickey Sagusa. So
mhm,
like Mickey knew everything in my
mhm.
opinion. So like during the final battle when she was just like crying out for Godzilla, I was like, girl, what are you doing? Like, what are
Yeah.
you doing? And so like I just remember being like so confused, like why is Mickey on Godzilla's side? She should be on Mothra's side. Like, nah. So but
Yeah.
yeah, that was the huge confusion of my childhood, apparently.
Well, for me, and even when I watch those movie or that movie particularly, um, I because there's some friends and some people that I know that don't really enjoy that movie. Yeah, they view it as like one of the
Well, send
weaker.
them my way, I'll fight with them.
I know because I love that movie. I don't, and I always say it's like cotton candy to me.
Yeah.
It's not substantial, but it's just so just enjoyable because there's the colors, the themes, the music, the Mothra being in it, Takarada's in it. I mean, it's just everything's in it that just makes you feel good.
Yeah, it was
So,
early 90s fan service, and I don't think like
mhm,
of all the Heisei films, I think that one does like the most fan service
it really
like
does.
with appealing to Showa nostalgia, right?
Yeah,
So I appreciated it for sure. Yeah,
yeah.
but yeah, I will fight anyone, trust me.
Oh
So
yeah, that is one of those ones that I find myself wanting to go back and rewatch like over and over again, more than some of the other ones because with like Gojira, like the original 1954 one, it's kind of a downer. And if you just want a feel good movie, you can't just put on just any Godzilla movie. You can't put on Shin Godzilla. You have to put on something that's a feel good. And to me, Mothra, like the Battle for Earth, that one is the feel good Godzilla movie. And so whenever I want to, just feel comfortable and sweet and not have to worry about anything, that's the Godzilla movie I want to put on.
oh, I love that. That's one of mine as well. I just, to continue gushing about this film, because here I go on a tangent. So, like, I just think that that film, like, obviously, I think a lot of Godzilla fans get frustrated with it because it focuses much more on Mothra and Batra than just
Hmm.
Godzilla, right? But I think what really makes that film stand out is like the way that it uniquely ends on kind of like this bittersweet but uplifting cliffhanger of just Mothra flying into space to save the world again. Like I
Hmm.
remember like for some reason when I was like an early teenager watching that film for the first time, I sobbed at the end. I was just like, is Mothra gonna die? Is Mothra coming back? Why is she like what is happening? But it was I thought it was very poignant,
Hmm.
and I felt like other Godzilla films just tended to end like more ominously
Hmm.
typically. So it was interesting for me.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. It's up there. It's up there as one of my favorites. I understand all the complaints that people have about it, but it's still up there as one of my favorites.
Yeah, same here. So, okay, so you've mentioned a few other ones. Like, are the other ones that you mentioned ones that you would qualify as your favorites, or are there specific films we haven't referenced yet that really stand out to you as your favorites?
It's hard for me to pick multiple favorites because a lot of the Godzilla films kind of all sit in the same space for me, and that's that I love them all. I love them all kind of equally. There's a few that are a little bit lower, some are a little bit higher, but the one that is the standout one is Godzilla 2000. That is my favorite. When people ask me what my favorite Godzilla movie is, that one's always my answer because it's the one I got to see in theaters. It's the one that I saw when I was 10 years old and I just fell in love with it, and it is another one of those comfort ones that I can put on and just enjoy the ride and just enjoy the time getting to spend with that time with Godzilla and with these other the human characters too. I love the human characters in Godzilla 2000 as well.
They were very dynamic, weren't they? And
Yeah.
that's another film that I think gets kind of trashed on by some Godzilla fans sometimes. Like a lot of fans tend to underrate it too, at least from what I've seen. Um
Yeah.
Granted, I again fight them over it because I like to be petty,
Well,
Uh,
I don't mind saying like the majority of my love for it is probably nostalgia. Like, I
oh
mean,
yeah,
the majority of it, and that is fine. I am unashamedly a nostalgia person that just loves the nostalgia of that film, and so every time I watch it, it brings me back to being 10 years old and getting to see Godzilla in the theater for the first time. Real Godzilla, because I saw Godzilla '98 in the theater too, but the Godzilla that I grew up with.
right. Yeah. So Okay, so Godzilla 2000 is like your favorite. Now,
Hmm.
if we were to like kind of branch out a little further and kind of hone in on some like human slash kaiju characters, are all of your favorite ones in that film, or are there other ones beyond that film that you love? And
Uh,
Daisy, right? Like Daisy
yeah,
is making a
Daisy.
guest appearance too.
Yeah, yeah, she's got to be the center of attention always. Daisy, okay, come on,
I
get
love
back.
Daisy already.
Yeah, she's a queen, and she expects to be
as,
treated like one.
as she should, right?
um, as far as human characters go, though, Mickey is one that I like like you. I just really attached to, because of the Heisei era. Watching it, she was kind of like, if anything, she was the point of view character for a lot of the Heisei movies.
Oh
So
yeah.
I think that, especially if you're young and you're watching those, you kind of get attached to her because she's the viewpoint. She's the one that you're following. She's the one that you're seeing through her eyes, essentially.
Mm.
So she's one that I definitely get really attached to. Outside of that, yeah, I love the father and daughter in Godzilla 2000 is just still their dynamic between the two of them. I grew up with a single parent, so the dynamic of, the daughter has so much responsibility and is so in charge and taking charge because the dad is so busy, taking care of the business side. So it's like, yeah, I understand that and get that, and it's just, yeah, it's really great.
She's so sassy too. Like I think part of the
Yes.
thrill of that film is just the banter that goes on in it.
Oh
Like
yes.
we've had banter in other Godzilla films, but I really think this film like really honed in on the banter, and I'm here
Oh
for
yeah.
it. I'm
Yeah.
honestly here for it. So, how would you say Godzilla has shaped you into the person you are today? Like as you've grown, like obviously your impressions and understanding of Godzilla probably
Mhm.
changed. Like how has he shaped you as a character?
Well, a lot of the shaping I feel like has probably come up in the last few years. Ever since I started trying to do the podcast, Kaiju Weekly. I started doing Kaiju Weekly, and of course with the magazine Kaiju Ramen, uh, that I started appreciating the films in a way that I had never really appreciated them before. But so much of my humor was shaped by, like, Mystery Science Theater 3000,
Mm,
because I grew up watching that, and a big part of my love of that is from Godzilla, because it kind of was like that, bridge. It's not that far of a leap to go from Godzilla men in suits monster movies to here's a show that's, sitting and watching and laughing, while enjoying, because they do enjoy. I know
mm,
people like to criticize, just as a side note, people like to criticize Mystery Science Theater 3000 as like, creating this atmosphere of it's okay to make fun of, monster movies, and they don't like that. I think it's okay, because I think that you should be able to laugh at the stuff that you love. That doesn't take away the love that you have for something, but I think it's okay. And that's kind of my mentality, has always been that, and that was shaped by the monster movies and the movies I grew up enjoying, because I grew up enjoying movies that other people thought were silly. And I'm like, yeah,
mm.
you know what? They are kind of silly. But you know what? I love them. And I love them because they're silly. I love them in spite of the silliness, in both cases, depending on which movie it is.
Oh, I love that you mentioned that because honestly, that's kind of been like my gateway toward getting people into Godzilla is through honing
Mhm.
in on the humor of the fact that
Yeah.
like there is like this kind of overarching stereotype of like, oh, men in suits, ha ha ha, right? But
Yeah.
like once like after they like are exposed to Godzilla and start watching more of it, they start understanding like
Yep.
the pop cultural like gravity of it, the
Hmm.
socio-political layers, stuff like that. Of course, with the help of my commentary, naturally,
Yeah.
but my annoying commentary.
Uh-huh.
But like, I do think that there is a space for the humor aspect, being able to look at it and be like, yeah, like in the grand scheme of things, Godzilla tripping and falling into that building was kind of ridiculous when it happened, right? Ha
Yeah,
ha ha. But on screen, it looks great, like that as an
it looks
example,
great.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so like, and I think that once people can set aside like that, like defensiveness that they get,
Hmm.
it becomes a lot easier. Like I remember I used to be that person. I kind of still am sometimes. Who am I kidding? I was that person like where like if somebody thought Mothra was stupid, I would
Oh yeah,
like I would have like a podium and I'd be like, here is a dissertation slash presentation on why Mothra is amazing and why you shouldn't think she's dumb. But now I'm kind
yeah,
of just like, now I joke about, I'm just like, you're triggered by Mothra. Ha ha ha. She's a queen, so
yeah.
I guess that works, right? But
Hey, she's big and fluffy and looks cuddly, and hey, that's why I love her. So
and she doesn't mess around. She does
she
not
doesn't
mess
mess around.
around.
Oh yeah, I
Ugh.
love Mothra. Mothra is my second favorite. I people
Oh,
people who know me online probably know that I do a lot of the hashtag Justice for Baragon. So I do love Baragon a lot, but I think people are taken aback when I say no. My actual second favorite monster is Mothra. Mothra is always going to be
oh,
second to Godzilla to me. I love that. I love the two of them together, how they work thematically. So having
right.
the two together just is so brilliant. One being, the life giver, this, this uh basically representation of earth and its
Mhm.
life-giving powers, and then here's Godzilla, who is, was affected by the bomb, was born of destruction, is destruction incarnate, and so the two themes work really well together. So I'm
Oh, I
always
love that.
they're
I
always
am
one and two.
nerding out right now. So Baragon. Okay, I'm very curious about Baragon. Like, so what made Baragon one of your top favorites?
I think the underdog aspect of it,
Yeah.
because Baragon never really got a lot of the respect that I thought he was due, because he's a really cool monster. Uh, Frankenstein Conquers the World, Frankenstein versus Baragon is just one of the best films from the Showa era, just in general, because
Oh,
that
stunning.
it is absolutely brilliant. It's a beautiful film. So it's up there as one of my favorite films, just outside of Godzilla, just one of my favorite Japanese films of all time. But yeah, so I think that aspect kind of plays into my love of Baragon, and then also just the meme, the meme of Baragon never got the respect, because it all started, the hashtag Justice for Baragon all started on Kaiju Weekly really early on, when me and my co-host were talking about how Godzilla, Mothra, King Ghidorah, giant monsters all out attack. They have this huge long title. They couldn't fit one more word in there and say Baragon. Like
Right?
Baragon is there also, but it's like you couldn't fit one more word into the title.
Baragon was robbed.
Yeah, so hashtag Justice for Baragon. I have the shirt. I have a shirt around here somewhere.
I I I love that. So, okay, let's talk about you as an artist because
Okay,
I think that you are a human being of many
artist.
talent. Oh, I think you are ridiculously talented. A human being of many different talents, and I think that each of them should be celebrated. So, well, this kind of like allows us to eventually segue into talking about the new Gamera film as well. But
Mhm.
I one of my favorite pieces is this cute
Yeah,
little like Gamera piece
yeah, my
here.
little Gam Gam. That's what I call him, Gam Gam.
Oh, so what motivated you to make this piece?
Well, I was doing a series of Godzilla themed stickers, and so I was doing a bunch of them, and I called it Hug All Monsters because they're all very cutesy
Mm.
looking like that. So it was all themed around Destroy All Monsters and everything. And so I was sharing a bunch of those, and I decided, I'm like, well, I really love Gamera too. I said I should do a few Gamera monsters. So I wanted to start with Gamera. Now I will say that that's an old version of that. I have redesigned the shell because I didn't like the way the shell turned out on that one. So I have redesigned it and made it look a little bit better, at least in my eyes. But yeah, I with my art, because I don't view myself as an artist. I'm a drawer. I draw,
Mhm.
but I'm not necessarily an artist. And one of the reasons why is because I struggle with just drawing what's in my head onto paper. I usually have to use reference. And so I found this reference of a one of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and he had this just adorable expression on his face. And I said, "Oh, that reminds me so much of Gamera." I said, "Just a cute version of
Mm.
Gamera." And so I said, "I'm going to draw a cute Gamera that looks like that." And so that's where that picture of my little Gam Gam.
Oh, I love Gam Gams. So when did you start realizing that you were beginning to develop a love for it? Was it through like watching the films and stuff or something
um,
different?
I well, because I grew up when I mean Godzilla was one of my first kind of, I guess, fandoms even before we ever used that term. I was in the Godzilla fandom, but I also grew up loving comic books. I was a big
Mm.
superhero fan, loved comic books, and so I used to draw. And my dad was an artist. Well, he's like me. He doesn't like being called artist, but
Mm.
he was a drawer. But he was really really talented, and so me and him would just sit and draw all the time. And I remember when I was a kid, I had a train set, and I wanted something for the train to go through because I couldn't afford, like, the tunnels and stuff where to go. I just had the little track that just went around in a circle. So my dad took a cardboard box and he drew the Cyclops from Ray Harryhausen's Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, and drew that on the box and cut a little hole under its legs so that the train would go under the legs of the Cyclops. And so yeah, and so I started drawing pictures of monsters and superheroes and stuff like that. Then I got to be a teenager and I stopped. I kind of stopped drawing, and I would say from the age of about 19 to the age of about 20. I would say probably about 29. So about that 10-year period, I wasn't drawing at all. I might sketch a little, doodle here or there, but for the most part, I wasn't drawing. And then I started trying to draw a little bit more here and there. And then it wasn't until I got back into doing the magazine and the podcast, and I started seeing and getting in touch and learning about all these other monster artists, Lisa Nafziger, Kaiju Hime, and a bunch of ones like that, and that I met through doing the podcast and doing the magazine. And I was like, I really need to start drawing again. And so I started drawing just, the same stuff that I remember drawing as a kid, my monsters.
Mhm.
And so I drew Godzilla and I drew Mothra and I drew all those. And so I started doing those little doodles. And then now I've kind of branched out and I've developed. Now I'm doing a little bit more elaborate drawings than when I first started. But yeah. So this is all the drawing stuff that people are seeing if they follow me now is fairly recent. This is all fairly new, and that's why I'm still kind of finding my way. I'm finding my path
Mm.
as an artist, um, because it is all still fairly new to me. But I have in the past drawn, like it's something I did, in high school and stuff. I took art classes in high school and stuff. So I did have a foundation, but what I'm doing now is really kind of new.
That really empowers me because your story is kind of similar to mine with regard to drawing. Because I used to draw a lot when I was a kid and an early teenager, and then I just stopped. And seeing the fact that you've been working toward reclaiming that, that's kind of like making me want to do the same thing. So
Yeah, well,
I've
when I was a
needed that
teenager,
extra.
yeah, when I was a teenager, I was like, well, art's not going to pay the bills. And so I got to do stuff that pays the bills. And so I stopped and I kind of got away from all of that. And so that's why I drifted away. And then now I'm getting back into it. And with commissions, hey, art is actually starting to pay some of the bills.
Oh, that's awesome. Oh, I love that. So, I guess so interestingly, you started mentioning the magazine and the podcast. So,
Mhm.
what how did your trajectory lead you into doing both of those? Because those are huge long-term creative outputs, which I think are amazing. So like tell me
Yeah.
the story behind those.
Well, I am the type of person that I need a creative outlet of some kind. And even when I stopped doing the drawing and the art, I would still do something. I would still, I would write, or I picked up crocheting for a little bit, crocheted myself a Doctor Who scarf because I wanted the
That's
fourth Doctor
amazing.
scarf because I was like, hey, I want to cosplay as the fourth Doctor, and no one will give me or make me a scarf, so I just learned to do it myself and made myself one. um so I need to do something creative or else I go crazy. And I was delivering newspapers at the time. So when I was delivering newspapers, it was overnight. You start at like 2 in the morning, you finish about 6 to 7 in the morning, and so I would listen to podcasts while I was doing that. And so I became a fan of podcasts. And then I had this wild hair idea that, hey, why don't I do my own podcast? And I found a friend online that I was like, hey, can we do a podcast together? We started doing and we wanted to do something that was fun and entertaining. And I had the idea of, well, I've always been a fan of giant monster movies. Let's do a monster movie podcast. But that friend at the time, his name was Jake, he had never seen any giant monster movies. He had not seen anything. He had no idea who any of these monsters were or anything like that. So it was like, well, we'll have this kind of fun dynamic of you're the newbie, I'm the experienced one, and we'll start this podcast and have fun. That lasted for about 6 months. We weren't very consistent with posting episodes, but we did it for about 6 months, and then life got in the way. We had to stop, and so we stopped for a while. And then about a year or so later, I started going nuts again because like I need a creative outlet, and so I reached out to another person that I knew, Steven, and I said, hey, I had this podcast, and I still have the name, I still have the artwork, I still have all this stuff. I just need a co-host. Would you, co-host it with me? And he said, sure, I'll do it. And he was a fan of Godzilla and everything. So we started doing the podcast. And then when Steven had to step away, Michael stepped in. He's someone I met while podcasting. He stepped in and he, took over. So that's kind of how the podcast got started. It was just this, I need a creative outlet. I need to do something or else I'm going to go crazy.
So that's so interesting. So obviously, like my understanding is that the magazine evolved into something after the fact. How did that
Yeah.
work out?
So the magazine came up because me and Michael, we were doing our podcast, and then a bunch of stuff, and I won't really get into it because I don't like bad mouthing, you know, people and other companies and
Yeah.
stuff because but a lot of drama was happening with GFan,
Hmm.
and GFan magazine was a big deal in the kaiju community. And I was like, well, GFan's really the only one that exists. And if people are upset with it and they're demanding, we need something better, we need something more, I said, why don't, I talked to Michael. I said, why don't we give them something? Why don't we do something? We can just put together a little digital magazine. We can do it, every quarter and put out that magazine. So he said, yeah, let's try it out and see. It took a little bit more convincing than that, but basically that's how it went. Uh, uh, but he always talks about it, that the way my brain works is I have an idea, and you're either on the train or you're going to get run over by the train when I have an idea, because I start going with an idea. And it just so happened that this just has worked out. We never expected it to be as well received as it has been, as big as it has gotten, and is continuing to grow. And yeah, we started just doing the magazine because we wanted to give something different, give because there's GFan is fun and there's nothing wrong with GFan, but it felt like they weren't giving the fans what they wanted,
Hmm.
and the fans were feeling kind of uh I would say, frustrated by not getting what they wanted from GFan. And so I said, well, let's do a magazine where we can present something that's more geared towards the fans. And so
Right.
that kind of is how that came about, and that has shaped our motto. Our motto for Kaiju Ramen is that we celebrate kaiju films as well as the fans who enjoy those films in creative ways.
Oh, I love that. And like as so like I feel like that a lot of a lot of the issues surrounding magazines is like the level of accessibility I think that fans have to them too. The
Yeah.
level of openness with regard to accepting multiple different art forms. Like for example, like I would never have probably gotten my poetry published in any other Godzilla themed publication because it's such a like very specific genre of writing. Like if it was a
Hmm.
piece of fan fiction or a short story, maybe. But like
Right.
when I approached you guys at Kaiju Ramen, like you seemed very eager. You were like, "Yes, please do." And that's very validating for me because I've always wanted like obviously I am a writer, like that's my career, right? Like I've
Hmm.
always wanted the worlds to collide of sorts, right? Like my Godzilla world and my writing world to collide, and finally, I think they happened with Kaiju Ramen. So, which
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's phenomenal.
Yeah, well, I mean, and I'm speaking for all of us who work for Kaiju Ramen and do stuff for Kaiju Ramen, but really just talking about me specifically, I love how diverse people are with expressing their love for something. Like the fact that me and you and Kaiju Hime all love the same movies, but yet we express that love for those movies in different ways because
Mm.
we have different talents, we have different, you know, things that we're good at and that we lean towards. And so the fact that we can express that love in different ways, I think it's fascinating, and I love celebrating that. And so for Kaiju Ramen, especially when we decided to add an artist alley section in the
Mm.
magazine, we always wanted to be like, artist alley at a con, you're going to see a lot of the same types of artists because it attracts kind of a very similar crowd of artists, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I wanted to kind of branch out. I wanted to say, hey, can we find someone who is a writer, a poet, a YouTuber? I want to, feature some YouTubers in there. We had a cosplayer. We got in touch with someone who cosplays in kaiju themed cosplay, and we were like, hey, we want to feature you in our magazine because we're like, that is a form of expression, and
Yeah.
you're expressing your love for the same films that I love, but I wouldn't, go and do that because I'm just not that creatively inclined. I'm creatively inclined in a different way. So I love celebrating the diversity that comes from how we all interact with media and how we all enjoy the same things and express that love for these things.
Yes, I and see, I think that's why I was really drawn to Kaiju Ramen as well, because like there is a lot of fandom diversity here. Like there
Mm,
are so many different people from different backgrounds and histories. That's part of the reason why I wanted to do this show as well, because like each of us have taken something away from Godzilla that other
mhm,
people might resonate with, but also might find very interesting and be like, like, wow, like you survived this because of Godzilla, or you grew into this person because of Godzilla. Like I think that that kind of helps us not only honor the franchise and the character,
mhm,
but it allows us to kind of add to what we've been given, right? Like I think of
mhm.
this as being like this large melting pot of creative output, and we're all like ingredients like being dashed into it. It's a very odd metaphor that I'm using, but it works. I think it
Yeah.
works.
No, and I totally get that because, there's and especially nowadays, again, not wanting to get into too much of a critical side of any one person, but there is a lot of discourse now about film and the film industry and
Mhm.
the films that are coming out. I think just today there was a director who made comments about the industry that that's happening in the era of filmmaking that we're in. But what's so fascinating about film is, and art in general, is that the media itself is only half the story. What
Right.
the audience takes in and how they interact with it and what they take from it is the other half of the story. And so, and that applies to anything. That applies whether it's superhero
Yeah.
movies, whether it's romance movies, whether it's Godzilla movies. The film itself is only half the story. The person taking it in and what they do with it now that they've taken it in is the rest of the story, and getting to show that half of the story through the magazine, through podcasting, through all of that stuff, I think is just really great and really fascinating.
I love that, yeah. And I think, like, I was just telling somebody this yesterday. I think with all of the different media that we are getting, all of this, like, we have, like, we had Shin Godzilla, we have the anime trilogy, Singular Point, we have, like, all of this new, like, tokusatsu, like, giant monster content on the horizon. Like, I feel like that we are in a kaiju renaissance of
Hmm.
sorts,
Yeah.
because I feel like the MonsterVerse and Shin Godzilla really kind of, like, brought everything back into the limelight and showed people that there is still a place for giant monster films. I'll include
Yeah.
Pacific Rim in that too. Like, I think that also contributed toward it. And as like a creator, like I'm sure you might be able to relate with this as well. As a creator, like I'm just soaking all that up.
Hmm.
I'm soaking it up because this gives me more opportunities to interact with the content and analyze it, create something new, write a fanfic, write a poem,
Hmm.
anything.
Yeah.
So, and then of course we just got the news yesterday that there is a new Gamera film coming after
Yeah.
how many years? 15,
15.
16,
Yeah.
15 years. Like we are finally getting a some sort of like new Gamera. Like I can't remember. I don't know if it is a film or if it's a series, if memory
It's
serves.
going to be a series on Netflix.
A series on Netflix. Like so
Yeah.
like that is huge. Like
Oh yeah.
and there are so many of us are Gamera fans as
Hmm.
well. So
Having the diversity of media, that's another thing I really am fascinated by, is when a character or a franchise can grow to the point to where you can have a diversity of the type of media that because I'm always in the camp of, if you're a fan of Batman, the fact that you can have a goofy, silly 1966 style Batman and also have the newer, more grim, more dark Batman, and the fact that those can coexist is fascinating. It's just fascinating how Batman can be both silly, goofy, and dark and gritty. And I like that the kaiju genre itself has grown to that point. And it's always been like that in Japan, but now American audiences are catching on, as far as like why, the wider audiences, because us kaiju
yeah.
fans, we always knew, but the wider audiences are catching on to the fact that giant monsters are not just silly, goofy. They can also be dark and serious. They can also be, whatever. And the fact that you can get this diversity of media from the same characters, from, you can have Godziban or Godzilla with the puppets, and it can be silly, but you can also have that coexisting with Shin Godzilla, and it works, and I love that.
Oh, yes. Oh, so I do want to gush about one more of your pieces of art before I
Okay.
ask you my final question for today. I like I am so obsessed with this art piece because it like to me it like this is like a MonsterVerse variant of Godzilla versus Biollante of sorts. So like I want to
Yeah.
tell me a little bit about the history here with this piece.
So and people who might be following me, especially if you follow me on my DeviantArt account where I post all my artwork, or on my Twitter account where I tend to share my artwork, you may notice that my art has evolved, and I've definitely grown a lot. That was one of my first ones I did when I first started getting back into doing art. So it is kind of rough around the edges, I will say. It's one that I view as kind of rough around the edges. And so I have learned that my art style leans more towards cutesy, kind of chibi, which is why I tend to do a lot of that stuff, because it just, as much as I try to push myself into doing more serious, more, actiony kind of stuff, it just doesn't seem to fit really well
Mhm.
with my style of art. Um, but yeah, that piece in particular, I was inspired by. There was a cover. Speaking of Batman, there was a cover from a Batman comic where Batman crossed over with Swamp Thing, and the cover showed Batman with a bunch of flowers kind of growing out of his mouth, and his eyes had flowers and plants growing out of his eyes. And I was like, that would be cool if you had Godzilla, and it was the Biollante kind of roses and vines growing out of him. And so that's what I
Oh,
did.
I love that. I love that. So, okay, last but not least, do you have any advice for Godzilla fans who may be new to the franchise? And I would like to include like any advice for like artists and content creators that you may have as well.
If you're new to the franchise, or you're just getting into this, I would say learn to enjoy the films for yourself. And there's nothing wrong with having an established fandom that you can be a part of. But for me, and I think one of the reasons why Godzilla is so ingrained in me, is because for a long time I had no one else. It was just me and Godzilla. I didn't have any friends who liked Godzilla. I didn't have any family. My dad left when I was young, so he was my one person that enjoyed Godzilla with me. And so it was just me enjoying these things. And then until I was in my 20s, I didn't start interacting with other people who also loved Godzilla. And then I get online, I start interacting with people online, and I start realizing, like, oh, there's people who enjoy this as well. Oh, people don't like Final Wars, but I like Final Wars. Then it's like I thought Final Wars was universally loved because I loved it. And then I get online, I'm like, oh wait, no, no. So I think there is something to enjoying these movies for yourself, and not letting others' opinions get in the way of your enjoyment, whether they be good or positive, or good or positive or negative. People's opinions can shape your opinion. It's just natural. Human beings, we want to be a part of a crowd. We want to be a part of something. And so we tend to adjust our opinions based on other people's opinions as a natural instinct. And so I would say that is my biggest piece of advice. If you're new to the franchise, learn to enjoy the films for yourself. And you can also interact with people, but you have to do it for yourself first.
Oh, I love that. Uh, that well, because like, we do want belonging, right? Like the belonging
Hmm.
is so important. Now,
Yeah.
for like artists and content creators, like, do you have any like little like crumbs of advice you may want to impart to the universe?
Well, as far as artwork goes, the biggest advice that I have been given, and have been given multiple times now, is don't try to fight your particular art style, because you have a unique style. Whether you are still new to learning art and you're still getting started with it, you do have an art style that's inside you, and it will come out, and there's no point in fighting it because it will be there. um so learn to embrace it. I mean, and you can't people do adjust their art styles, some, but I've had to really learn to embrace that side of me, because when I was growing up and I was trying to do art, I was like, yeah, none of the artwork ever turned out the way I wanted it. And I have realized now it's because my style, like I said earlier, doesn't fit with what I was trying to do. And now that I know what my art style kind of leans towards, I can kind of just lean more into it and start doing more of that. And it turns out really great when I try to do that. And yeah, and just don't be afraid to share that passion with other people, because I hate seeing people who are afraid to share their passion and their art, whether that be your podcasting or whether that be YouTube videos or whatever. Don't be afraid to share that. It is a very scary thing to put yourself out there. I know I do it all the time and I'm still
Oh,
scared,
yeah.
but don't be afraid to do it, because there are people out there who will embrace what you give no matter what.
That's very powerful. I 100% agree. Travis, this has been such a wonderful conversation.
Yeah.
I am so glad that you were able to, be here with us and have this conversation. So, plugs. Where can people find your
Okay.
stuff?
Well, you can find out all about the magazine, Kaiju Ramen Magazine, on kaijuramenmedia.com. That's where we have a bunch of stuff. We also post kaiju movie news and stuff that's going on in the kind of kaiju wide world of kaiju ramen and kaiju media on there. So you can go check that out. The podcasts that are still going right now, I'm no longer podcasting. I kind of had to step away from it and take a break from it, but Michael, my co-host, and Nathan, they are still running a few podcasts, so you can find out information about their podcasts on kaijuramenmedia.com. As far as my personal stuff, you can follow me at Captain Travis 55 on Twitter, and I think it's Captain Travis 55 or Captain Travis. Yeah, I'm sure it's Captain Travis 55 on DeviantArt. Those are my two places I post a lot of my artwork. I don't use Facebook. I don't really like Instagram, so those are my two right now. And yeah, and I'll still be posting stuff on there until the ship sinks and goes away forever.
Well, everyone, all of those links will be down in the description section of the video, so please go check those out. Again, Travis, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah,
So
I enjoyed it.
I've enjoyed having you here too. I've been waiting for a while and it's finally happened. I'm excited. So just to let everyone know, like, since this is the final episode of the season, Growing Up with Godzilla will be back in February. So just keep an eye out for updates and news on that. A lot of things are coming down the pipeline for the next season. So anyway, you all have a great rest of your night, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.